Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, November 7th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the 2026 Senate elections. The Tuesday elections for the Democratic Party, in which they saw a massive overperformance relative not just to the 2024 election, but to almost any recent election in many of these states and districts that saw races come across the country: California, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Georgia, and so on and so forth. And what it inspired amongst the Democratic Party, as noted by Politico, is that Democrats feel bolstered by massive wins across the country, and now they've started to make the decision to eye out-of-reach Senate races across the country. Now, the 2026 Senate map and the math here has never been quite good for the Democratic Party. As it stands right now, Republicans hold dominant control, and their majority is 53 to 47. Visually speaking, on the Senate map for re-election in 2026, you're working with Republican incumbents all across the country. You're working with Republicans in a lot of the states, you would arguably expect to see them in, and Democrats, too, are in some of the states that even Donald Trump won in the last election. But the main takeaway here is there aren't that many opportunities for pickups in 2026. Of the states that Democrats are presently targeting, including some that they currently hold, you have states like Michigan and North Carolina and Georgia and Maine. But beyond that, the Democratic establishment doesn't seem to be super comfortable investing in the way that they might even in some other states. And the big problem here for the Democrats is that it isn't even just a problem of getting an additional seat, making it 50-50 like their reigning majority from 2020. That could happen, for instance, with Sherrod Brown in Ohio. In this event, J.D. Vance breaks the tie. So then they would need to find something else. And that's really where you'll find whether or not, this is something that is feasible. There's a lot of conversation around going into states like Nebraska and Texas and Alaska and Iowa, but that's yet to be fully explored up until recently, as Democrats, again, who seemingly are bolstered by these pretty substantial victories, to say, hey, wait a second, this might be possible. And it makes sense. When you take a look at the results that we've seen, for instance, in Virginia, when Abigail Spanberger is winning across the state by 14.6% after Kamala Harris only won the state by 5%, you really start to see the energy shift, not just in Virginia, but across the country. When you see in New Jersey, a state that was sworn up and down would be solid for, the GOP, not solid rather, but a much more solid result where they'd get within a few points, and Ciattarelli has an outsized chance at victory, only to go on to lose by 13. It shows that Democrats not only outpaced their own expectations, but even the expectations of the pollsters that historically have overestimated Democratic support. And in California, a state where 77% of votes are counted, but the results are likely to get better for the Democratic Party, Prop 50 is set to pass by a larger margin than that of Kamala Harris's victory in the state in 2024, and potentially even further than Biden's 29-point victory in 2020. The point is that Prop 50 is overwhelmingly expected to pass, and it wasn't always meant to be that way. And so now that we look at what 2025 showed us, just a rundown of consistently strong and overwhelmingly performing elections for the Democratic Party, they now look to the Senate map to see where's their pathway at winning in 2026. As it presently stands, it isn't great for the Democrats. Assuming they win Michigan and Georgia and they hold on to those states, they'd have to reasonably win in North Carolina, which isn't impossible to see, but then it gets a bit more tricky. It's harder to see that in Maine. It's harder to see that in Ohio. And even if they do all of it, they still lose the Senate majority. And that's because Democrats would need to start looking elsewhere. The main states they've been focusing on are the four: Michigan, Maine, North Carolina, and Georgia. But now it seems that they are focusing on states like Nebraska, as mentioned by this article. It seems they're looking at Iowa and Ohio, states that, again, aren't always, seen as this very locked in and solid margin for the Democratic Party, but it also isn't as solid and locked in for Republicans either. Iowa, in theory, could move to that point. Ohio, Nebraska, Iowa, all states that have been mentioned, but also now Alaska as a state that Democrats might be targeting for 2026, and arguably, too, with the right Democrat, you could see them targeting it in Texas. Because Democrats came into 2026 with this foregone conclusion the Republicans are going to win Senate control. And I actually stand to believe that as it stands right now, the Republicans are certainly the favorites to do so. Now, Senate math hasn't always been kind to the Democratic Party, even in wave years. In 2018, despite 2016 having, Democrats at 48 and then a special election in Alabama bringing the Democrats to 49, in 2018, Republicans gained about 2 seats, even though Democrats were winning in West Virginia, Ohio, Montana, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all states that Donald Trump had won in the last election. Republicans still came ahead. They flipped Indiana by a pretty substantial margin, 6 points. They flipped Missouri by 6. They flipped North Dakota by 11. They flipped Florida by 0.12. They held on to Texas. They held on to Mississippi. They held on to Tennessee. And while Democrats absolutely did a lot better, they still lost net seats. And while we won't see Democrats lose net seats in 2026, there was no real possibility, seemingly, that Democrats could win Senate control. Unlike in 2006, when Democrats took Republicans having a 10-seat advantage to flipping it back on its head, with Democrats gaining 6 seats across the states. And we can actually take a look at the results of 2006 versus 2000, the year 2000. Democrats did phenomenally better in a lot of these states, and the majority of them swung overwhelmingly in favor of the Democratic Party. And I think that goes to show, what 2006 was for the Democratic Party. I mean, it was a very different time, though. If you're interested at all as to what that type of election looked like, this is the governor's map, right? Deep red California and deep blue Wyoming, something out of a fever dream, right? But what was the status at the time? Right, that Tennessee had Phil Bredesen, who won every single county in his state, where you had a Democrat in Oklahoma winning almost every single county in the state. In Wyoming, you had a Democrat who won every single county in the state. It was a very different time. The 2018 Senate map looks a lot more similar to our national politics, save maybe New England and Kansas. But the rest, pretty on par. Red Iowa, red Ohio, red Georgia, red Florida, red Texas, red Arizona. Sure, it makes sense. And while there's always anomalies, like a deep red Massachusetts and a lighter red Maryland and a light blue Kansas, at the end of the day, 2026 was never really gunning out to be what 2006 was until recently. And even though it might not end up being that way, Democrats are contesting it for a reason. They see an opportunity, a chance of a fluke victory. One that might usher in a senator, not Bernie Sanders. I was thinking Bernie Moreno, which is why I said Bernie. But a senator, Sherrod Brown, after 2 years off from the U.S. Senate. That might shockingly bring in Mary Peltola to the U.S. Senate rather than the United States House, and that could bring Democrats and usher them in forward to victory on the Senate level. And while there's no guarantee that it happens, nor does this seem like something that I think is likely, more likely than not, rather, it still could absolutely happen. It just doesn't seem to be the, prime number one target for the Democratic Party. At the end of the day, because of what we saw in 2025 just days ago, the opportunities for the Democratic Party seemingly have explored. Because as much as there has been this conscious effort to court Mary Peltola in running for U.S. Senate by Chuck Schumer, by Democrats across the country, and even here on this channel, we've covered it numerous times, there hasn't been the degree at which we've seen our conversations around Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, or Maine, even though there's an interest in it, because those are not the primary states. And Democrats seemingly had given up all responsibility surrounding the U.S. Senate with this foregone conclusion that Democrats have been pretty much keeping an open secret, operating under this assumption that it's a done deal when it comes down to the U.S. Senate. But I do believe adamantly that the 2025 results have inspired something different in many Democrats across the country, where what they've seen was a 9-point swing in the state of Virginia that if it had translated to the presidential level just a year ago, Democrats would have won nationally with 319 electoral votes and came within striking distance of Maine's 2nd District, Iowa, Ohio, Florida, Texas, and Alaska. And for Democrats, this is the good place. It's not a solid and locked-in map, but it does suggest that in Alaska, for instance, or Texas, or Florida, that with the right candidate, and with the right nominee, and with the right circumstances, these states could be tremendously more competitive for their political party. And that's why they're investing. Because it isn't just on the Senate level. If we were to shift the national margin of these states in 2024 by 9 points, Democrats not only would have not been down 53 to 47, they would have maintained Senate control with or without a Vice President Tim Walz. Texas would have been down to less than a single digit. Ohio would have been blue. Montana would have held on. And Nebraska would have had Deb Fischer packing her bags in January of 2025. But it wasn't that electorate. But that's what Democrats are seeking in 2026. And arguably, it very well may happen. Because if this is the result of what 2025 did, what's to know what happens over the next year if the possibility is that Donald Trump becomes even less popular nationwide? Obviously not a guarantee, and certainly not something that Democrats can quote-unquote count on, but is something that Democrats across the board are thinking about. And that's why they're willing to make that investment and to say, we're now looking at Alaska. We're now looking at Iowa. We're now looking at Ohio. Because it just simply makes sense. And while 2025, I don't think, is this end-all be-all when it comes down to understanding what 2026 might look like, it gives us an interesting picture. And one that, if is in fact correct, the odds and possibility of the Democratic Party winning Senate control in 2026 absolutely do skyrocket if that ends up being the case. And while there is no guarantee, there is certainly a possibility that there could be a fluke race, and that's only possible if Democrats seriously invest in them in the way that this new article and this new bolstered feeling of a political party that has felt out of power for quite some time is finally feeling in 2026 happens. A fluke could happen only with the investment of this political party, and only time will tell to see if they actually follow through with it, or if this is just another pipe dream, seemingly as something the Democrats do not end up doing. But chances are they'll follow through given how tremendous the results were for them this past Tuesday. But again, only time will tell. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.